Well, it's a truly complex picture that emerged, honestly,
Yeah.
and we're going to pull apart what happened, what it all means, and, why it's left so many people pretty surprised. Our sources today are the latest reports from BBC News and CNN, which should give us a really comprehensive view.
Yeah, definitely. And our mission here really is to cut through all the noise. We want to examine the specific legal findings, look at the different perspectives, the reactions surrounding this whole thing. It's a very high-profile case. We'll help you understand the nuances, the legal process itself, and what this verdict actually implies, so you walk away with the key insights.
Okay, so let's unpack this then. The jury has spoken. This was after, nearly 2 months of testimony and 13 hours of deliberation.
That's right, a long process.
Yeah. And the big headline, the thing that really caught many, I think, by surprise, is that Sean Diddy Combs was found not guilty. Not guilty of the most serious charges. Racketeering, which is basically, alleging involvement in an ongoing criminal enterprise.
Like RICO.
Exactly. And sex trafficking, which is forcing or coercing someone into commercial sex acts. And these included accusations related to his ex-partner, Cassandra Ventura, Cassie, and another woman they just called Jane.
Right. And what's fascinating here, I think, is the distinction the jury made. Because while he was cleared of those really severe accusations, he was found guilty on 2 counts. 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution. And these charges relate to both Cassandra Ventura and Jane.
Oh, okay. So that's the split.
That's the split. So the natural next question is, what exactly do those convictions mean? What do they entail? And how were they different enough from, say, sex trafficking for the jury to draw such a clear line?
Right. That's the crux of it, isn't it? So these transportation to engage in prostitution charges, they basically allege that Combs transported Cassandra Ventura and Jane, and also male escorts across state lines, specifically for the purpose of prostitution. That interstate element is key.
Yeah.
One count was specifically about Ventura, who, he dated for a long time, roughly 2007 to 2018. And the other involved Jane, who testified under a pseudonym, and she dated Combs more recently, 2021 to 2024.
And to break this down even further, Jane testified about going with Combs to what she called hotel nights. These were events where she engaged in sexual encounters with male entertainers, often in a hotel room with Combs, right there.
Okay.
And Ventura described similar events, very similar. Combs apparently called them freak-offs.
Wow.
These things allegedly took place all over Los Angeles, New York, Miami, Turks and Caicos, Atlanta, Vegas. And afterwards, the escorts were apparently paid something like $1,500 to $6,000 in cash by Combs.
Wow. Okay. And what really, what solidified the prosecution's case on those transportation charges specifically? Like, what evidence really moved the needle for the jury there compared to the other charges?
Well, they didn't just have the testimony, right? They bolstered that testimony with tangible stuff, things like flight records, American Express charges, hotel invoices, all lining up with the dates and locations of these alleged events.
Oh, the paper trail.
Exactly. And they even presented sexually explicit video footage of Ventura and Jane engaging in sexual acts with male escorts, which apparently corresponded with the dates on many of those flight records and hotel invoices.
Right.
There was a legal analyst, Misty Maris, who commented last week that, in her view, the transportation charges were, quote, proved by leaps and bounds by prosecutors. She called it truly very simple. Did individuals cross state lines with the intent to engage in prostitution? Quote. So that insight kind of helps us understand why the jury might have landed on those specific counts. The evidence to the transport and the payment seemed pretty direct.
Yeah, that makes sense. The trial itself, though, it sounds like it was intense. They heard from 34 witnesses, ex-girlfriends, former employees, male escorts, federal agents.
A lot of people.
And it painted a picture of Combs that was described as controlling, violent, and abusive.
Oh.
And central to the whole case, and certainly chilling for a lot of people watching, was that hotel security video, the one showing him assaulting Cassie Ventura as she tried to leave one of those freak-offs.
Yeah, that video was powerful. And these freak-offs, they were consistently described in testimony, right? As these hotel sex encounters involving multiple male escorts, large quantities of drugs, apparently baby oil supplied by his assistants.
Yeah.
And they could last for days, according to the testimony.
Days. Wow.
But the defense, their argument was essentially that, okay, domestic abuse, however horrible, is not the same thing legally as sex trafficking or racketeering. And, well, on those specific charges, the jury ultimately agreed with them.
Okay. And beyond that distinction, the defense also brought up arguments about racist undertones, right? Claiming this was targeting a black man for his sexual preferences, for using prostitutes. And they argued there wasn't enough proof the escorts were paid specifically for prostitution versus just, for their time or company.
Hmm.
From a legal strategy point of view, how significant do you think those arguments were in the end, especially compared to the direct evidence you mentioned?
That really gets to the complexity of what the jury had to decide. It's a great question. Elliot Williams, who's a former Deputy Assistant Attorney General, he suggested the jury likely, quote, got hung up on the complex nature of these relationships, particularly that question of consent, which is crucial for sex trafficking
Oh,
charges.
yes.
He noted that some text messages that came up in court were actually, quote, not very good for the prosecution on that specific point. And that the relationships, while he described them as complex, fraught, ugly, violent, were also ones where, yes, they were technically consensual relationships, at least in the legal sense needed for that charge.
Okay, so that nuance was critical.
Absolutely. And he also added that trying to put all these charges under that big umbrella of racketeering conspiracy, ARCO, might have just been a stretch for this jury. It really highlights the challenge prosecutors face in cases involving complex, often abusive relationships. Proving that clear line into trafficking or a structured criminal enterprise. It often hinges on demonstrating a total lack of consent or a really defined criminal organization, even when awful abuse is clearly present.
That's the critical distinction the jury had to grapple with then.
Exactly. That seems to be what happened here.
So the immediate aftermath, the verdict comes down. Lots of emotions in the courtroom, I imagine.
Oh, yeah.
Combs himself, apparently he'd prayed with his kids beforehand, stayed kind of hard to read initially, but when the not guilty for racketeering was read, he put his head in his hand, then did a little fist pump, apparently subtle, after being cleared of the second sex trafficking charge. And after the whole verdict was read, he knelt down, bowed his head, then faced the gallery, clapped, and said, "Thank you. Love you, Mom. I love you. I love you." His family apparently erupted in applause, chanting "Dream Team" for the lawyers.
Right. A very different reaction, though, from Cassie Ventura's lawyer, Douglas Wigdor. Much more nuanced. He said he was pleased that Combs still faces substantial jail time from the transportation convictions. But he clarified this was, quote, not their desired outcome. They obviously wanted convictions on the RSCO and sex trafficking charges.
Understandable.
He really emphasized that Cassie, in his view, paved the way for any conviction and left an indelible mark on the industry and the fight for justice. And Uyghur strongly pushed back against the defense, trying to paint Cassie as some kind of winner because she got a civil settlement earlier. Said, no amount of money undoes 10 years of alleged abuse, including claims of forced sex acts, rape. He called the defense arguments repugnant for trying to frame the behavior as just a modern-day relationship or suggesting she somehow enjoyed sex under those alleged circumstances.
Yeah, really strong words there. It's interesting, though, isn't it, how different the interpretations are? Because on the prosecution side, the SDNY, the Southern District of New York, they put out a statement saying, sex crimes deeply scar victims. They've prioritized a victim-centered approach, thanking their teams, law enforcement.
Standard official statement, yeah.
But then you have someone like Ellie Honig, the CNN legal analyst, saying Combs has essentially won for all practical purposes, and that this is a devastating setback for the SDNY because, as he put it, they don't like losing in court. They don't lose in court a lot. How do we square those? Who actually won here? What does this verdict truly mean?
Well, that's a great question because it really depends entirely on your perspective, right, and what you define as a win. I mean, for Combs and his legal team, avoiding those racketeering and sex trafficking charges, which carried potential life sentences, that is undoubtedly a massive victory. Huge.
Okay, from his perspective, yes.
For the SDNY, though, despite getting convictions on the transportation counts, failing to land the big fish charges, the ones they really went after, especially given the resources likely poured into such a high-profile case, yeah, that can absolutely be seen as a professional setback, at least in terms of their public win-loss record. They aim high.
Right.
But then, from the perspective of victims, or someone like Cassie Ventura's lawyer, securing any conviction that acknowledges harm was done, that holds him accountable on some level, that's a step towards justice, even if it wasn't the full extent of what they hoped for. It really just underscores how complex the idea of justice can be in these kinds of high-stakes trials. It's rarely black and white.
So what happens now? What's next? We know the convictions for transportation to engage in prostitution. Each carries a maximum of 10 years.
That's right.
So theoretically, he faces up to 20 years total. But as you mentioned, legal experts seem to think it's unlikely he'll get the maximum.
Yeah, that seems to be the consensus. And the really crucial question right now is, will he walk free today or very soon? because he's been behind bars since his arrest back in September last year. That's over 9 months already.
9 months, right.
And one legal expert, Mitchell Epner, he suggested Combs could end up walking out of the courthouse today a free man.
Yeah.
His reasoning cited the, quote, horrible conditions at the federal jail in Brooklyn, the MDC. It's notoriously bad.
I've heard about that place.
Yeah, and judges often try to avoid sending people there if they can help it, or factor time served there heavily. Epner suggested Combs' attorneys will absolutely be pushing hard for time served, which could potentially lead to an actual sentence maybe closer to 3 years, factoring in the time already done, which is obviously way less than the life sentence he was facing.
Wow, time served after 9 months on convictions that carry 20 years max.
It's possible. L.A. Honig agreed, saying, there is a realistic chance that the judge lets Sean Combs walk out today or maybe tomorrow. It depends on the judge's calculation.
And that decision rests with Judge Arun Subramanian. Nominated by Biden, first South Asian judge in the SDNY, apparently the judge even joked with Combs earlier about knowing he doesn't want to go back to MDC.
Yeah, judges often have a sense of the conditions. Now, both sides submitted letters arguing about bail while he awaits sentencing. The defense says, look, he was acquitted on the most serious stuff, let him out. He'll abide by conditions at his home in Miami.
Okay.
But the prosecution strongly opposes his release. They argue the trial showed extensive abuse, drug use, that he doesn't respect the law, he'd likely commit new crimes, and they've confirmed they will be seeking incarceration time at sentencing.
So a real conflict there for the judge to decide. And beyond potential jail time, could there be financial penalties too?
Yes, definitely. Erica Hashimoto, a law professor at Georgetown, mentioned the government could try to seize money if they can prove he profited from the specific crimes he was convicted of. Or the judge could issue a fine, or order restitution, that's payments to the victims, Ventura and Jane, if the judge finds they were financially or otherwise harmed by the transportation offenses.
Okay, so more consequences potentially down the line. Outside the courthouse, meanwhile, sounds like it was chaos.
Oh yeah, total chaos. Supporters cheering, anti-Diddy protesters being very vocal. The NYPD apparently had to close down the block, put up extra barricades to manage the crowds.
And the trial itself, it's clearly had a huge impact on his public image, right?
Palpable impact.
Yeah.
Content creators who were following the trial noted, he's been this cultural icon for decades, but his image has taken a massive hit. One creator, Angela Starr, put it pretty starkly. When you think of Diddy now, you think of baby oil.
Wow. That reference from the Freak-Off's testimony.
Exactly. And apparently there were even reports of people spraying baby oil into the crowd outside the courthouse, referencing that pervasive testimony. It's become a sort of symbol of the whole sordid affair described in court.
Man, this deep dive, it really does highlight how these huge, high-profile cases shape public conversation and what justice even looks like, especially when you have powerful people involved and the legal outcomes are, well, complicated, nuanced. So we've navigated through the complex legal landscape, the public reaction surrounding Sean Diddy Combs' verdict. This deep dive has really shown us how a jury's decision can spotlight that intricate line between different criminal acts and the challenges, of proving certain allegations beyond a reasonable doubt, especially when relationships themselves are so complicated.
Yeah, absolutely. And if we kind of zoom out, connect this to the bigger picture, this case, maybe as Cassie Ventura's lawyer put it, it proved that change is long overdue. Change in how society addresses powerful men, powerful people in general, and the kind of misconduct that maybe has persisted for decades without real repercussions. It's a reminder that even these partial legal victories or mixed verdicts can still significantly shift public perception and maybe even set new precedents going forward.
So thinking about everything we've discussed, what really stands out to you listening to this? Maybe it's those specific legal definitions, that difference between transportation and trafficking. Maybe it's the raw emotional testimony we heard about, or maybe just the public's intense fascination with the whole thing. It's worth considering how this verdict and all the discussion around it might influence future cases involving celebrity, power, and allegations of abuse. Something to think about.